All right, guys. This week's show, again, I say it every time. I'm so excited to talk to our guests, but this is at a totally different level, so unexpected. But let's jump into the quick review of the week. I got a review from Eric from Canada. So, Eric from Canada, we're international, folks. We're international. Eric from Canada says, I appreciate everything Dan and his guests are doing for me. The Journey of a Christian Dad podcast provide guidance to us dads in a unique manner. They simply relay the massive responsibility we have raising our children in today's increasingly confusing world. Our children are one of God's greatest gifts to us, and we need to help. And we need help, he says. I'm 23 years into this journey myself, and I wish this info was available to me years ago. Self-help books always put me to sleep, but these podcasts are gold. Keep up the positivity. So thank you, Eric from Canada. I appreciate it greatly. And now let's get started with this week's guest. We have got Nikita Koloff. He's very well known for being the NWA National Heavyweight Champion, the NWA World Tag Team Champion, NWA Hall of Famer, and gosh, when I think of him, I think of all the cage matches and the chains. He's been involved in more cage matches than anybody I can think of. Welcome to the Journey of a Christian Dad podcast, Nikita Koloff.
Dan, what an honor and a privilege to be with you. And even that introduction brings back memories.
Oh, so good, so good. So we got introduced by Tracy Jones. She's the daughter of Charlie Tremendous Jones, and she runs the Tremendous Leadership Academy for her father. And it was the coolest thing. She just sends like the briefest little, "Hey, you guys should talk." And I'm like, this name says Nikita Koloff, the Russian Nightmare.
I I told her, Dan, when I told her we connected and you were familiar, she's like, "Oh my gosh, for real?" I go, "Yeah, apparently." So she had no idea. She had
Yeah,
no idea.
she did not put the Russian Nightmare. She didn't put anything about wrestling. She said, "You guys should talk. You guys will get along." And that was it. And I'm like, there's like about a 0% chance that this is the Russian Nightmare. But, and then you replied and you're like, "Oh, by the way, I have a podcast too." I'm like, really? And I flipped through your guests and I'm like, this is the Russian Nightmare. This is unreal.
And with Tracy Jones as one of the guests, right? So I
Yes,
know
yes. So amazing.
that's
One of my
awesome.
buddies, I told him you were coming on, and he goes, "Tell him to speak English." I'm like, that won't be a problem.
Oh, you know what's amazing about that? Even with the advent of the internet and just how wrestling's been exposed, I to that point all the time people are like, "Where's your accent?" And it retired when I retired, right? So,
You can still do it though. Throw us a little something.
well, comrade, I can put a little something out there if I have to, you know. But yeah, that usually brings back memories for folks as well.
Oh, so good, because that was one of my first thoughts. I'm like, oh boy, I'm gonna really have to listen close and really pay attention. And I wonder how this is gonna sound on a podcast. And then I hit a couple clips, and I'm like, oh,
Yeah, I mean, part of the story. I was doing a quick story. I was doing an autograph signing with another wrestling peer, Lex Luger,
yes,
who now is a brother in the Lord and co-facilitates a camp with me. We do a lot of ministry together. But we were doing an autograph signing in Virginia, and I'm signing away. And all of a sudden, I hear this woman speak fluent Russian. I'm like, "Oh dear Lord, here we go again." Because I don't speak Russian, for the record. I know a few words, but that's about it. And so I'm like, well, if I ignore her, maybe she'll go away. Well, she's not going anywhere. And she says something else. And I finally look up and I make eye contact with her. And she's like glowing, she's got this little kid with her. And I look at her, I go, "Ma'am," I go, "I'm not really from Russia." And she went from a glow to like a scowl. Like she took a step back. She goes, "You're not really from Russia." She had kind of this broken accent. She goes, "I drove 3 hours here to meet you," her hero, right?
right.
And you're not. I go, "Ma'am, it was just a character that I portrayed. It was just part of the persona." She was so mad, Dan. She never did get an autograph. I felt sorry for the
Oh
little
my
kid.
goodness.
6 hours in the car, and I burst her bubble of her hero.
Wow, a
Yep.
quick cursory internet search, 30 seconds would have revealed that.
I know, maybe saved her 6 hours, or at least, anyway. Yeah, that's just one of many stories.
That is incredible. So it's awesome you brought up Lex Luger like right away. Guy that's in our community, a guy named Robert Lamb. He's like, hey, have you ever read, Lex Luger's book, Wrestling with the Devil? And he tells me a little bit about it. I'm like, no way, that's so cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Lex had a transformational encounters April 23rd, 2006. And I reconnected with him just a couple months after that out in Phoenix at an athletes conference, a Christian conference. And after about 11-year really separation or hiatus from our wrestling careers, and then began to really just mentor him, pour into him, help disciple him. And that led to us doing so many ministry things together. And in addition, like I said, we still do some autograph signings and that sort of thing. But ministry is the first focus. But man, he loves the Lord.
It's so cool. Did you have any idea that you had a purpose for your life outside of wrestling?
Did I?
Yeah.
No. So what's interesting is if I look back even to my childhood, I can go back to age 12 when I picked up a muscle magazine called Iron Man. And I was enamored by the guys in the magazine, and remember making a statement saying, one day I'm going to look like one of those guys. And then bought a weight set, started lifting, and then started watching football and got a vision for playing football. At age 12, Dad, I feel like I laid out my whole life. I had the whole plans laid out at age 12. Little did I know at age 34, fast forward, and I find myself at an altar surrendering my life to Jesus. And for the first time, I find out, oh, somebody else has a plan for my life. God has a plan for my life, a plan and a purpose greater than me. And so that was revelatory.
Yeah. When you're, got a mission that is totally separate, and maybe you think wrestling and bodybuilding is the thing, and then it gets revealed to you that no, 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 all that was to help later in life.
Yeah, really just honestly preparation. I say this, I go, well, and the whole wrestling story is crazy in and of itself. That's why I ended up having to write a book about my life story to fill in the gaps for everybody. But when I look at my wrestling career, breaking in the way I did, which was totally different from anybody else. What did I do in wrestling? I flew in airplanes, I rented cars, I stayed in hotels, I talked on microphones in front of cameras, entertaining people for a living. Then I give my life to the Lord. And now I look back the last 28 years and, oh, I know, I fly in airplanes, I rent cars, I stay in hotels, I talk on microphones in front of cameras, not to entertain crowds, although I can do that, but it's to bring a much greater message, the good news and the gospel to the world. And so I look at my wrestling career as nothing more than God's sense of humor and part of my training for the ultimate call on my life and the mandate that he set in place for me, set in motion.
Yeah, that's a great point. The training that we go through prepares us for what's to come, whatever that might be. And we might not have any idea of what's to come. So that's really, really cool that the not only the bodybuilding and the in the ring activity, but then also all the other things outside of the ring prepared you for what you've been doing for years now.
Yeah, it really did. And I had a neat illustration, another neat illustration of that. My pastor, Jay Stewart, was planting a new church in Concord, North Carolina. I was actually living in Nashville, Tennessee at the time, and I just got back from a mission trip in Africa, South Africa, and he said, "Hey, we're planting a new church. Guess what building we got?" And I go, "I don't know. I don't have a clue." He goes, "Well, we got your old gym building." I go, "Get out of here." He goes,
What?
"No, for real. We got your old gym building. We're going to transform that thing from a gym into a church." And so, I felt led to move back and be a part of that. And I literally got to watch that building transform from a weightlifting facility. I say training physical muscles to
Right.
becoming a facility to train spiritual muscles, if you will. And then it hit me. I'm like, wow, this kind of parallels my own life. right before me in the physical. So yeah, another little cool story.
So I want to go back to your childhood, but before we do, since we're talking about physical, what do you think about physical training helping you in life? Any quick thoughts on that?
I think it's an important part of our overall health. And what I mean by that, in 2015, God gave Lex and I a vision for a conference and a camp. So I do a 1 day conference called Man Up. And then we do these camps called Man Camp, simply Man Camp. But it centers around, Dan, around First Thessalonians 5:23, being whole in spirit, soul, and body. And in my view of that is being healthy spiritually, healthy emotionally, mentally, healthy physically. And again, we're representing Christ out there to the world, and our physical health, I feel, plays an important role. And they're all interconnected. So, I mean, if you're suffering physically, at some point it's probably gonna impact you mentally, emotionally, and ultimately spiritually. I mean, they're all interconnected. So you can't. So it is important to balance the three and not just be so laser focused on, oh, I just want to grow spiritually, and I won't pay any attention to my health, and the next thing my physical health, and the next thing you're sick, you got disease, all the because you didn't pay attention. So I think it's super important part of our overall health.
Yep, absolutely. Well, thanks for drilling that down. I believe in the physical training as well, whatever that may be for people, but you gotta take care of your body as well as your mind and your spirit for sure.
Yeah, and it's my attitude. Something is better than nothing.
Yes.
So I mean, you don't have to join a gym and try and look like Mr. America. Just be active. Just be active and take
We've
care of
got
yourself.
those bands, those stretchy bands at the house.
Yeah. Yep.
My daughter
Absolutely.
sees me stretching my legs and doing different things, and she's 9 and she's a pretty tough girl, and she says, "Dad,
Yep.
this is nothing." I'm like, well, my body works a little different than yours and it needs a little help stretching and things. And she can
Right.
do the splits and all that. And she starts doing curls with it. She goes, "Is this working out?" I'm like, well, I mean, it is. It looks a little bit easy for you, but yeah, even lighter, less strenuous stuff still counts as working out. So she's trying to
Absolutely. Absolutely.
so it's
That's
cool when the
awesome.
kids
Good
look
for
look
her.
to us for that leadership. And by her seeing me train and do things, she then trains and does things on her own. So that's pretty cool. So
It
love to, oh, go
it
ahead.
is. And to that point, for your audience, as men, as dads, I mean, you know, what they're watching, just that example, they're watching, they're paying attention. I think my oldest daughter, Taryn, quick story on her, when she was little, probably 9, 10, 11, whatever. She's like, Dad, I hate the taste of water. I'm like, well, get over that because your body's made up mostly of water. All she wanted to drink was soft drinks. I'm like, well, that ain't happening,
Oh, that ain't gonna work.
and and she's 39 now. She probably wouldn't want me to say that, but she is. And but if I go over to her house, spend some time, which I do fairly often, she carries a thermos with her everywhere she goes, and it's not soda pop in there; it's water. It's water in there. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, exactly. I just finished my glass before we got on,
Nice.
and but I'd like to think because of what I modeled and for them and imparted, into them, they're now living it out. So that's crucial as a dad, as a man of God, to in terms of what we model for our children and for the rest of the world.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's take a chance. I meant to start the podcast talking about kind of your childhood and upbringing. I know a little bit about it, but it seems like our parents are such a big impact on us, both dad and mom, and dads have a pretty dang big influence, whether they're present or not present. Can you talk about a little bit of your upbringing?
Yeah, and because it's that's a cool story as well. And I had some very humble beginnings. I wasn't always a world champion in pro wrestling. Some very humble beginnings. Um, Officially, it was called the Minneapolis Housing Authority. Uh, we affectionately called it the ghettos or the projects of Minneapolis. And I mean, I could see the Minneapolis skyline, from my door. And we were that close to the downtown. And those were the early years where life began. And I was raised by a single mom. My dad left when I was about 3, and I was the youngest of 4, and he didn't really support the family financially, so therefore we defaulted to welfare. So I can remember all the little special, humiliating, uh, embarrassing food tickets, that we had to hand in at school to get our lunches and all that sort of thing. And my mom would eventually move us out to the suburbs, a suburb called Robbinsdale, Minnesota. And it was there that life, things took a turn for me. And that's where I picked up that Muscle magazine. That's where things began to change for me. My focus began to change. Obviously, I didn't have a dad in the home, to model anything for me, good or bad. And so, in one sense, that may have actually been a blessing in disguise. And what I mean by that is, he was a professed alcoholic for 25 years. He did give his life to Jesus at age 46, when he says, I grabbed the old rugged cross, and it was a genuine encounter. It changed his life. He went on to live another 46 years. So he lived to age 92. He came back into my life, Dan, in college. He started coming to my college football games, but it was more like a casual friendship than it was a father-son relationship. All that said, condensed the story on his, I guess it would have been he was about 83. I was 46. And I was 46. And the Lord put it on my heart to start reaching out to him more and making more regular phone calls. And every time I hung up to say, hey, Dad, one more thing, I love you. And I had never said that to him ever. I'm 46 years old, never told my dad I loved him. And he would just respond back with, oh, thank you, or, that's nice, or whatever. And that's fine. And it took about a 5-month process there of consistently calling him, just having a conversation with him, telling him I loved him before I got off the phone. It was about 5 months before he finally reciprocated, for the first time, I love you, son. And then that in conjunction with some letters I wrote him and just other things I did, that led to a complete reconciliation of a father-son relationship for the last number of years of his life. And he even traveled with me to some of the churches I preached at, shared his testimony. I preached. So it was like Father, Son, and Holy Spirit present and accounted for. And I'll say this real quick. The last thing, I was there, I sensed he didn't have much time left, and the Lord sent me back to Minnesota. So I got to spend the last 4 days of his life with him in his
Wow.
assisted living. And the last night I was with him, he muscled himself up out of the chair to give me a hug. He didn't even know how to hug until I started hugging him, like for real. I had to teach him how to hug. And the last words out of his mouth, Dan, that I ever heard from him were these words: I love you, son. I love you, son. So it was just a great story of reconciliation for those out there who maybe have a strained relationship with their dad right now, or there's always hope. God's in the redemption and reconciling business. He can redeem that relationship.
How'd you feel when you put yourself out there and told him you loved him and then he reciprocated back with, oh, that's nice?
I had no expectations. One thing I've learned, and still learning, is not to place expectations on others or on my day, but really just to have more. I would say it this way: more of an expectancy than expectation. Meaning, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know how he's going to respond, and if he doesn't respond back with "I love you too," that's okay. I mean, he went all those years without 80 something years without saying it. I can't expect him just to, flip a switch and automatically say it. So my consistency led to him finally saying it, but I was okay with that. I didn't So there was no disappointment. I wasn't discouraged. I'm like, okay. I mean, I almost expected that, if you will, but
Right,
him
right.
not
Yeah, yeah.
responding, so yeah, so it was okay.
Yeah, here in situations like that, like just let God take care of things and give it up to God and let him have his timing. I've had my things where you know, years of praying for something specific that seemed like it should happen, but I let myself feel like I should be in control of that. So it's pretty cool that you went 5 whole months and like, whatever happens, happens.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I was determined and yeah, just like you said, just going to trust the Lord on it. And of course he brought, and then I tell you another really kind of cool story too, is when I first gave my life to the Lord, because I didn't have a dad grow up, I can remember my early walk with Jesus of like, how do I love a dad? Because right, because he's our Abba, right? He's our heavenly dad, our heavenly daddy, our Papa. And I thought, how can I love a dad I can't see when I don't even know how to love a dad I could see, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then after the reconciliation, I remember we were in Iowa. It was I think being inducted in a Hall of Fame up there. Dan Gable, Olympic wrestler, has a
Oh yeah.
museum and Hall of Fame up there, and he was with me. He traveled down from Minnesota with me. We roomed together. We were roommates. It was pretty cool for the weekend. And he was up in the room taking a nap, and I vividly remember I was sitting on a bus bench outside the hotel, and I had like an aha moment. I'm looking at the hotel, and I'm thinking about him up there taking a nap, and I'm like, okay, God, I get it. So you reconciled this relationship with my dad, so I could have an actual physical example of what it looks like to have that love relationship with a father. So I could better know how to love you as I learned to love him. And it was like, wow, God, you're so cool. Yeah.
That is so cool. And it's amazing how you can continue to learn how to love more and love better. And wherever you are, it's like there's still another level yet, and it keeps revealing itself. Uh, and it's tough for the guys whose earthly father isn't, well, none of our earthly fathers were Jesus, but we all fall short.
Yeah, they're right. They're all imperfect, right? And the unfortunate thing in many cases is our view of God, the heavenly Father. If we had an angry earthly dad, then in many cases, because I work with a lot of men, I minister to a lot of men working, then their view of God is an angry father, right? And so it's interesting how an earthly dad, what a role a dad plays, and not only how we relate and treat wives and children and family and friends, but how we even view our relationship with God, and then how our children and others then view that relationship. Yeah, it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember a time when I was going to church as a younger guy, younger kid, and there's a little fire and brimstone being preached at church. And at the same time, my dad got angry a little bit, like visibly. And um, I felt like God had that angry God, thing. And
Yep.
my dad changed a little bit, and the church services changed a little bit, a few years later. And I was like, oh, wow, okay. God's a loving God, forgiving God, graceful God. And my dad also, a lot of teenagers weren't the perfect model child. And I certainly had some things where thankfully my dad, did the right things as a father to help guide me in the right way. But through him, I was able to have a great relationship with God, um, by not seeing him as opposition or trying to keep me from great things or things I wanted to do. Um, so yeah, yeah,
Yeah, just such an important role, and we really do. We play an important role in the overall scheme of things.
yeah. So you obviously had the pro wrestling thing, and back then, like heavy metal and those big bands that you knew behind the stage what was happening, or at least you thought you knew what was happening. And I picture that NWA lifestyle where you're the ticket, that you also had that rock and roll lifestyle.
100%. I mean, it was a lot of parallels there in just in the entertainment world in general, right? And whether you're a movie star, a rock star, a wrestling star, a football star. I mean, at that level, um, essentially everything's available at your fingertips. And so, depending on what choices you make, what decisions you make, that can certainly be good or bad, but it's all right there. It's all right there, available, every bit of it. Hmm.
How has that played into how, as you transitioned and started following Christ?
Well, for me, I feel fortunate in that, like truthfully, like I never. That's not to say I never drank alcohol, but I never acquired a taste for it. For example, I never enjoyed the taste of beer. Liquor, hard liquor. I joke and say, I used to drink the foo drinks, the girly drinks. If I said, I can mask the taste of the alcohol, and so it's not that I never drank, but I never acquired a taste for it. Never really, honestly, really enjoyed it. So when I gave my life to the Lord, for me personally, it wasn't hard to give up. And that's not, that's between an individual, their decision and the Lord. But for me, I know He called me to live to a certain moral standard. I say a standard of excellence, and I didn't want to, in any way, cause a brother to stumble or fall. I know even recently, Lex, at our last camp, was sharing with the guys that he goes into he speaks a lot of rehabs and different things. And so, he says, I don't want to go in there and have those guys trying to overcome alcoholism or drugs or whatever go, well, Lex, so do you drink alcohol? He goes, I want to be able to say no and say no truthfully. Again, don't want to cause a brother to stumble or fall. On the drug side of things, fortunately, I never got hooked up to that at any point in time. I mean, whether it been cocaine, marijuana, painkillers, pills, none of that,
Wow.
fortunately. Yeah. And so, unfortunately, a number of my peers that, some of whom names are pretty familiar, did go down that path, and I feel died at a very premature age because of those decisions and combining a lot of those things together. And it led to I believe, premature death. But so I've been fortunate. I've been fortunate that I didn't have, part of my story isn't I overcame drugs and alcohol. Like I said, my dad was a 25-year alcoholic. So in one sense, when I say it's kind of a blessing in disguise, he wasn't in the home. If I had watched him get drunk every night, I don't know, maybe I would have felt differently about alcohol or whatever, right? But I didn't have that influence. But when he got saved, I mean, he was delivered of alcoholism, and instantly he was set free. And again, for your audience, I mean, if you struggle with something out there, if you're struggling even right now, even as a believer, we all have different struggles because we're all imperfect, right? But man, if you're struggling with alcohol, with drugs, with pornography, I mean, there's nothing God can't set you free from. Nothing.
Yeah, absolutely. You really were blessed not having your father around for 25 years, stepping into the lifestyle and the people that you hung around. You know, Ivan's got some pretty fantastic drinking. Ivan, your tag team partner.
Uncle Ivan. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's got some pretty fantastic drinking stories out there that are very public.
Well, I'm gonna tell you what, he's an amazing testimony too. Like, right. So he and I traveled together exclusively the first 2.5 years of my career. So I knew Uncle Ivan's lifestyle inside and out, right? And which is interesting. So he had that lifestyle as well as a number of other wrestlers. But yeah, we traveled together in the same car, shared a hotel room together, but I never indulged in any of that. I had no interest or desire. And I wasn't even a believer yet. I just had no interest or desire. And a year and a half after I got saved, I felt prompted to invite him to a revival, an evangelist from South Africa. He showed up. I didn't know he was there until I saw him at the altar.
Wow.
And he surrendered his life to the Lord. And it was one of those transformations, Dan, that night, through that decision, he was set free of alcohol, drugs, tobacco. I mean, he used to do he like a pinch between his cheek and gums. You know, he used to love chewing tobacco. Man, he was set free of all of it. I don't know that he even said another cuss word after that night. Went
Wow.
on to become an ordained minister. And yeah, he was a testimony of a changed life that night at the altar.
That is amazing. So Dusty Rhodes has always been a guy that also fascinated me. He wasn't always on every week. He wasn't always featured, but he would just show up and had this mystique about him. And I know you and Dusty, obviously, with the super team and him being the American Dream, you the Russian Nightmare. I think he gave you the nickname.
Yeah, it kind of came off of, we were working in what we call an angle, he and I against each other. And I was like, you're the American dream. Well, I'll be your worst nightmare. And that's kind of where the Russian nightmare kind of came from, because Ivan was known as the Russian bear. So I needed a nickname anyway. But American Dream, I'll be your worst nightmare. And that's where that kind of originated from. And then when I made the switch, if you want to say, I saw the light and became a good guy, and we teamed up as the Thupa Power, if you will. Yeah, Dr. Rhodes, the American Dream, baby. Yeah. Nikita and I, we're the Thupa Power. Yeah. Everybody loves to imitate Dusty, right?
You do a fantastic Dusty Rhodes imitation.
Well, I'm glad you enjoyed that. And it was fun spending a couple of years up and down the roads with him. I just fell in love with the man, and got to know him behind the scenes, and just enjoyed the time I got to spend with him.
Yeah, wow. What a character. Any stories about him that jump out top of mind?
I mean, he just, he said he had a certain mystique about he had what I call an intangible, an intangible. I think way, way, way back when it was a guy. I think it was a guy named Jimmy the Greek that they used to do this football thing, and they go over the pros and cons, and then they say, "Here's the intangible. Why I think so and so might win." Right? Dusty had an intangible about him that a charisma, if you will, that just drew people in to his character and to who he was. That's not to say everybody loved him, because that just wouldn't be realistic. But he just had that, especially when it came to interviews. Like when you watch those interviews, Dan, those weren't scripted. Those were 100% like spontaneous improv. Our era back then, they didn't hand us scripts. We improved basically everything, from the interview to the matches themselves for the most part. And Dusty was he was, in my world view, a genius in that realm. I mean, he created the Great American Bash. He created the War Games. He was the brainchild behind the Best of Seven series against Magnum TA for the U.S. heavyweight title. That was part of his creation. He just had that knack. If there was one regret that he and I didn't do, we would fly on. We had these private planes we'd fly on, he and I, and we'd always look at, back in those days, the USA Today want ads, and we look at land out west, like
Okay.
Montana,
Yeah.
Idaho. We're like, man, let's go in, let's buy 1,000 acres together, so, and we'll divide it up or whatever. And I'm like, yeah, let's do it. We never pulled the trigger on that. And now I'm looking back going, man, I wish we'd bought some of that. I would love to have a cabin in the mountains of Montana or something, but
Yeah, no kidding. No kidding.
yeah, so great memories of Dusty though.
Yeah, yeah. I always enjoyed watching him. When you first came on the scene, I thought to myself, oh my goodness, this is horrible. How did those Russians get this guy? they're going to destroy us. Like Ric Flair has got no chance. Like I didn't really, I like Ric Flair, but on the other hand, I couldn't stand him either because of how conceited and pompous and everything he was. But,
Right.
you know, he was our guy. So I was going to stand by him. And then you showed up. I'm like, oh no, this is horrible. Now to find out that you couldn't wrestle a lick. Your first match was 13 seconds because you didn't know any wrestling moves. So they staged it. So you won. Just
That's it. Yeah, that's what
unbelievable.
I'm saying. It was a crazy introduction. No amateur wrestling background, no professional training. I show up after literally after a 5-minute phone call with the promoter, Jim Crockett Jr., and I drive to a city I'd never been with all the things I owned to my name on a 5-minute phone call, and showed up the day he said to be there without another conversation in between. And he took a look at me and remember the statement at age 12, one day I'm gonna look like one of those guys in the
Yes.
magazine. Well, at age 12, I might have been 100 pounds dripping wet with rocks in my pocket. I mean, I was not a big kid. Fast forward 12 years, the day I walked into Jim Crockett's office, I was 285 pounds, 8% body fat with a 34-inch waist. And I look back and think he must have saw dollar signs, rolling through his eyes if he thought I could work at all. They put me right on the interview set. They introduced me to Ivan and Don Cornotto, the world tag team champions, put me right on the interview set, said, you don't speak any English. I'm like, just stand there, look mean, have your shirt off. I'm like, okay, I can do that. And then we finished all those interviews. They said, be in Raleigh, North Carolina tomorrow night, the Dorton Arena. You're going to wrestle on television, having never been in a ring. And so, needless to say, it was a bit nerve wracking, but I pulled it off without messing up. And then the rest was kind of history, as the old cliche goes. It was a meteoric career. 13 months after that debut that night, I'm wrestling Ric Flair for the world heavyweight title at the Great American Bash. Yeah, it's crazy.
I was so upset for you because he got disqualified at one of these championship matches, and you finally get the belt, and then they say, no, 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 that's not the way this one works. This one, the disqualification can't be a belt transfer. He lost,
Right.
but it can't be a belt transfer. He can't lose a belt because of a disqualification. Like, you've got to be kidding me.
Yep. Yep. I mean, we had a lot of classic matches together, and it's the one belt I never held. And people ask me, do I regret not having that championship? But a little known fact is Rick offered it to me two different times. So, and I'm one of the few guys probably in the history of wrestling that actually turned it down. I said, yeah, thanks, but no thanks, Rick. And so, even though he offered it to me, and it was just a timing thing. And I was at a place where, I was like, I don't know that I need that, my character was over. And so no regrets on not saying yes and taking the belt.
So when you transitioned out of wrestling, uh, some people have said the Barry Sanders of professional wrestling. You're at the kind of pinnacle of wrestling, and wrestling dollars exploded. So the wrestlers started getting paid a ton of money because it went international. What was that transition like, and thought process, and what was going on in your life where you made that switch?
Well, from a young age, one of my pet peeves was athletes who hung around too long. I just feel like, why can't these guys retire? I'm like, Joe Montana, you look better in a 49er uniform than you do a Kansas City Chief uniform.
Yeah,
You've won
yeah.
Super Bowls. What do you have left to prove? Kind of thing. And I get it. I mean, I was an athlete. I get you want to compete, and I get that. But for me personally, I remember in my childhood saying, when I make it, and I didn't know it'd be pro wrestling, but I said, when I make it one day, I'm going to walk out on top. I want to walk out as a champion. I want to walk out, with my health and all of that. And so I told Don and Ivan when I broke in, I'll be out of active in-ring wrestling by the time I'm 35. And they're like, no, no, you won't, and I'm like, yes, I will. And so when I made the decision, um, I was 33, getting ready to turn 34. I did suffer a couple injuries in my last match. I was wrestling a big dude named Van Vader,
Yeah.
Vader for short, 450 plus pounds, like legit, a big guy. He injured my neck. I didn't know until the next day, but I had a hernia. I ended up having hernia surgery. I was rehabbing my neck. So it wasn't career ending, but I was rehabbing over Thanksgiving and Christmas and New Year's. I'm like, I'm done. You know what? I'm done. This would be a good time to walk away. I'm getting ready to turn 34 anyway. What do I go back for 6 months or 9 months or a year? Nah, I'm done. And so it was right before, as you said, the explosion of pay-per-view and Monday Night Wars and Nitro and all that. In fact, Lex, when he first heard I was leaving, he's like, in his own words, I think he said, "That guy's an idiot. That guy's a moron. What's he doing?" Because guys went from making, thousands of dollars to like you said, multiple millions and millions of dollars and tens of millions of dollars. And I walked away from all that. And even looking back, again, no regret on that at all. Now, I didn't know 11 months later, I'd find myself at an altar surrendering my life to the Lord. But when I look back and think about the literally the millions of dollars that I gave up or walked away from, um, when I think about the last 28 years and all the people that I've had the opportunity in some way to impact, like Ivan, the story, like Lex and Sting and many others, a number of other guys in our profession and people just around the world, you can't. How do you put a price tag on that? You can't. You can't put a price tag on that. So, where I didn't necessarily store up treasures on earth and millions of dollars here, I do feel, Dan, as though I'm storing up treasure in heaven by being faithful in my walk and to be obedient to what God has now called me to do.
Was your transition somewhat smooth leaving wrestling?
Yeah, it was no fanfare because, like I said, I did get injured that
Yeah,
last
yeah.
night, but there was no fanfare. There was no retirement party, no celebration on their part. They tried to even take advantage of it, saying, "Oh, Van Vader put Nikita out of wrestling." And I will say, to Vader's credit, years later, I was doing an autograph signing at a WrestleMania, and he sought me out and came up and he said, "Hey, I've never told you, but I just want to ask you to forgive me. Tell you I'm sorry that I hurt you that night." And so, to his credit, he did say that he didn't have to do that, but he did, and I had no animosity towards him in any way. He had a reputation for being reckless. I knew that, but I didn't hold anything against him. It just sent me it just sent me into early retirement, if you
Yeah,
will.
yeah. So when you got away from the crowds and all that, that transition was just okay, or did you have some challenges there?
Well, what's interesting, because so I spoke with the accent, right?
Right.
And I did that for 9 years, from 84 to 93, 24/7 anywhere in public. So I wouldn't be speaking like this in public. I mean, I would have been carrying the accent, comrade, and anywhere and everywhere. So when I retired, I'm like, how do I transition out of that character? I mean, do I just one day go, "Hey," I had a gym, right? Do I just walk in the gym one day and go, "Hey, how's everybody doing today?" I'm like, no, I can't do that. So I actually maintained that persona. And part of it was the old school mentality of protecting the wrestling
Yes.
business as well. So I carried that persona for about 3 more years post retirement. And then what I did was I just kind of slowly phased the accent away, and nobody really made a big deal out of it. I'm sure, but they all knew anyway. I'm sure, but nobody said nothing. Nobody made a big deal, and then eventually, I just went back to talking, as myself. You know,
That's great. So you just brought up Sting. Talk about Sting for a bit and your relationship with him and that.
Another solid believer, Christ follower. He gave his life to the Lord August of 1998. I like to think I had a little bit to do with that. In December 95, they were wrestling in Charlotte, North Carolina. I had not seen them since I had left wrestling. So it had been about 3 years. Now I'm on fire for the Lord, right? I get saved 17 October 1993. It's now December 95. I cornered him at the Coliseum for about a half hour. I like to say I spewed Jesus all over him, man. I was like, ah, and he's like, dude, I got to go for a match. I'm like, we'll continue this conversation. And he talks about this on my, when I interviewed him on my podcast. I'm like, we'll continue this conversation. He goes, I walked away going, oh, no, we won't. I've heard enough. And only to find out, you know, he gave his life to the Lord in 98. And then I had an opportunity with him for, I say about 5 years, about once a quarter to fly out to his ranch and just pour into and invest and sow into him and his sons and just build a great relationship with him outside of wrestling. My younger girls, Kendra and Colby, you know, did some things with his daughter Gracie, and so we just we built a great relationship with each other and still have that relationship today. And of course, you know, the wrestling career, the matches both against each other, Russian chain matches. Quick story about Chicago. He and I had a Russian chain match, and I love to wrap a chain around the guy's neck and throw him over the top rope and, you know, illustrate that I'm hanging him. Well, the key to that is get your fingers between the chain and your neck so you can breathe. Well, it happened so fast he wasn't able to do that, and I'm like working the crowd and looking around. I'm like, wow, he's really putting this over. And little did I know that the chain is cinching up tighter and tighter around his neck. And he's like, dude, I was like seconds away from passing out when you finally released the chain. And so you know, we talk about that moment on the interview, and he reminds me of it often. But and then later on, you know, I'd be a part of the War Games at Sting Squadron, and you know, we became friends, you know, teammates, if you will. And but we had our share, you know. Luger, when I in the cage match, when I dropped the U.S. heavyweight title to him, you know, he says to this day that I, you know, ruptured one of his discs or something. It took him months to overcome it, you know. And so, you know, there is an element of danger to a professional wrestling match. It is entertainment, but there's a very element of danger to it. It's not an exact science, and guys really do get hurt in that business, and sometimes more serious than others. But yeah, the Stinger, man, what a wonderful man of God.
Yeah, he just had that persona about him too when he stepped in. Just like when you stepped in, I was like, who is this guy? This guy's a freak.
Yep, yep. Yeah, he had again kind of that the intangible, right? You knew you sensed that there were, you know, that one, there was greatness within him and that he was going to have as we know, a long iconic career. You know, he's still out there doing it. Kudos to him. He's 11 days younger than me, and I'm like, Steve, just be careful, bro. Just be careful.
Yeah, absolutely. Any idea why so many wrestlers, it seems like, have turned their lives over to Christ either late in their career or after their career was over?
I think, you know, in knowing some of their testimonies and you know, whether it's professional wrestling or you're trying to climb the corporate ladder or whatever else it is, you know, without a relationship with Jesus, you find even if you make it to the top, you're going to find that it's still very lonely and an empty, lonely place to be because, you know, whether it's alcohol, drugs, you know, sex, pornography, you know, success. The only thing God put eternity, when he created us, he put eternity in all of us in that the only thing that's going to bring that true internal peace and fulfillment is a relationship with Jesus, a personal relationship. In fact, I wrote about this in one of my books, Wrestling with Success. You know, I was successful, but I was unfulfilled prior
With
to my
Jeffrey Gittimer.
salvation. With Jeffrey Gittimer, yes, you know Jeffrey.
I do know Jeffrey. We've met, we've talked, we've had dinner together. He's self-appointed king of sales.
He is Jeffrey. I mean, we have such a great friendship and just love Jeffrey. The short version of that story is years ago, he and I crossed paths. He was a major wrestling fan. I knew of him. Of course, he knew my career. We hit it off. We went to lunch. We hit it off and have become the best of friends. I've stayed many times at his place in Charlotte, and of course we co-labored together on Wrestling with Success on that book, and I've done a number of podcasts and interviews and training, sales training stuff for him and with him. Yeah, and he is he'll introduce us as he'll say I'm the Jew and he's the Gentile in this relationship, and so he's old. I'm Old Testament. He's New Testament. So we have fun with with that whole thing. But yeah, Jeffrey is amazing. But in that book, I talk about being successful but unfulfilled, and so I think many of the guys, directly to your question, were successful, but they too were unfulfilled. All the baubles and trinkets and millions of dollars that they made still left them empty inside, and came to the realization, what's going to bring me true happiness, or what's going to bring me peace and joy? And they figured out it's that personal relationship with Jesus.
Guys, listen, you probably just heard that, but just in case you missed it, we're talking about kind of reaching the peak, the pinnacle, and guys still feeling like they're missing something. In episode 1, the Navy SEAL, he talked about how he got to be a Navy SEAL and he was never so depressed as the very next day. He reached the very top and there weren't any other mountains to climb that were higher than the one he had just climbed. And there wasn't anything else left for him to do on this earth. And then it took him a while to figure it out, but it's Matthew Kelly says there's a God-sized hole in each of us and only God can fill it. So we've got to let him in. Yeah. So we've got to let him in.
Yeah, that's I like that God-sized hole. That's, I guess, that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm referring to when I say, he put eternity in all of us, and that desire for something more, and that something more is that relationship with Jesus. That's the only thing that's gonna bring it. And we were talking about this the other day. A number of guys, part of their testimony is, man, when I made that decision, this peace came over me that I had never experienced before, or I had never felt before. And it's hard to describe that to somebody who's never experienced that, right? I like to say there's a big difference between exposure and experience. I mean, we can be exposed to the gospel. We had a guy, I tell you a story, Dan. We had a guy at our last man camp that came to me one morning. Well, he came to me at lunch, and he said, "Hey, I want to share with you what happened this morning." And he started tearing up, and he goes, I was out of my devotional time. I was reading our book, and God spoke to my heart and said these words to me. He goes, Greg, you got saved in your head, but you've never invited me into your heart.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know you that way. And he goes, I just crumbled to my knees. He goes, I wept like a baby out there. He goes, I got saved this morning out of my devotion. I go, Greg, how old are you? He goes, 69.
Oh.
I go, how long you been in church? He goes, most of my life. He goes, and I'm chairman of the deacons.
Oh.
And I was like, wow, chairman of the deacons, 69 years old, in church most of his life. And God says, you got saved in your head, but you've never invited me, because it's all about the heart, right? You said,
right.
We put a God-sized hole in all of our hearts. And it's because it's about the heart. It's not about how much knowledge you have, how much you attain, how much scripture you memorize, how many times you go to church, you grew up in a Christian home, you had Christian parents, you went to a Christian school. It's not about any of that. Heaven, your entrance into heaven isn't dependent upon your heritage. It's dependent upon you making a personal decision. And Dan, I thought to myself, how many other people are like that, sitting in church week after week after week, year after year, that are saved in their head, but the story has never made the 18-inch trip from their head down to their heart. And Jesus illustrates this in the book of Matthew, when people come to him one day and say, hey, we prophesied in your name, we raised the dead in your name, we went to the men's Bible study in your name, the ladies' social in your name, we attended church every week in your name. But he's going to say to some, but I never knew you, because that story never made the 18-inch trip from the head down to the heart, and there was never a real genuine transformation. Doesn't mean they might not have been a good person, you know, uh, done lots of good things, philanthropic things, all kinds of things, you know, wrote books, did all kinds. But man, it's about the relationship. I can't emphasize that enough.
I've got two daughters, and we had a book author on. He wrote a book called Thriving Girl Dad. His name's Brian Young. He's got four daughters, and he wrote a book about his four daughters. And you've got four daughters. What type things did you try to speak into their lives, and what type of influence did you try to have?
Yeah, well, first of all, yes, I survived. Um, Four
Yes,
girls, I
I hear
survived.
you there. Mine aren't quite in the teen years yet, so I survived. Is
You've got two. Just think in your mind. Just double that. Whatever you're experiencing with two, just go. Okay, Nikita had twice this experience.
yes,
Um, and Yeah, it's. I guess for me, I joke. I say, I swam in the estrogen ocean for years. Right, emotions play a factor with girls. Um, but what I tried to instill, well, and model for them is, like, I was very intentional every week to have a daddy daughter date, daddy daughter time. And, obviously at different stages of their life, different ages, I did different things. I mean, when they were single digits, was, the Chick-fil-A playground, I mean, it was,
yeah,
but as they, maybe became teenagers, it might have been a date at the mall, and take them to the store and buy them a new outfit or something, or go take them bowling, or take them to a movie or something. But so we did things that, together, but I also tried to make sure I had individual daddy daughter time. I went to their schools. I went to their, some of them were cheerleaders. Some of them played sports. I went to their events. I went to their plays when they were in elementary school. I went to their school and had lunch with them when they got older, and said, Dad, you don't need to come to my school anymore. I still went, picked them up, and took them to lunch and brought them back to school. Read them Bible stories, prayed with them before I dropped them off at school. So I was a very engaging dad and very intentional to do things with them, and do my best to make them feel important,
mm,
and that they could, whatever they could dream, they could achieve if they really wanted it. And so I was trying to encourage them that way as well. Um, and really incentivized, especially the older girls, incentivized their, again, readers are leaders, right? So I encourage them to be leaders. And so I would put out there that, hey, if you read X amount of books and you write just a little summary about it, I'll give you X amount of dollars, just as an incentive,
mm-hmm.
to get them in that habit of reading, and becoming a leader. From a and they're all grown up now. They're in their 20s and 30s. They're all on a very healthy path in life. They're all grounded and got their feet on the rock. So I'm very fortunate to have four girls in today's world. I married off Colby, the last one, earlier this year.
Oh
So they're all
wow.
married. They got godly men taking care of them. So I'm thrilled about that. And then that's led to 9 grandchildren currently and counting. So yeah, yep.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Something I found funny. You legally changed your name to Nikita.
I did. It's part of the persona. Remember, right? I said I don't speak Russian, but I learned to sign my name in Russian. I got this workbook, this Russian workbook, and it had like a cassette, and it had some Russian on it. I'd listen to that. Ivan and I would listen to that cassette up and down the highways, on way to towns, and I thought, if I really want to get this character over, I've got to legally change my name, and so I did that. And in fact, the girls became Koloffs, and until they got married anyway. And that's just what I did. And people ask me though, is that your real name? I'll go, yeah. And then someone will think, they'll go, but you speak like pretty good English. They're like, what, is that your birth name? I go, well, that's a different question. And they're like, well, what's your birth name? I'm like, you have to buy the book for that one. I can't give you that for free, you know? Anyway, so I just have fun with people, you know, that whole deal. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I love the fact that you were known for selling out to your character. And then I saw that. I'm like, oh my goodness. And
Yeah. Well,
you,
yeah, that's, I mean, I think that's part of, because obviously I had a much shorter career than some of my peers, right? Ric Flair and others that you mentioned, Sting and even Luger. Luger had a 15-year career, and really some have said, even though I had such a short career, it seems like it was a very impacting. Because here we are, all these years later, that I am removed from wrestling, and at least in terms of active wrestling, I'm still out there doing, you know, Legends autograph signings, Comic
mhm.
Cons, those sorts of things. Um, but I attribute to that success to how serious I was about getting that character over, maintaining that persona, and making that impact. You know, the impact I did on the wrestling world. You know, and so I feel very fortunate, very grateful that people still even want my autograph all these years later. You
Oh,
know, it's
heck
just
yeah.
just a very humbling thing.
And I know you weren't Christian back then when you were wrestling, but that's an example of having excellence at work, just commitment to excellence. And I like to apply that in all areas. And then as a Christian, we use that to glorify God. So it's important to be excellent at work and develop yourself and your character because you can use that in other areas of life as well.
Yeah, 100%. And anyone who knows me, or knows me well, knows that, if I'm in, I'm all in. I mean, if I'm gonna one day want to look like one of those bodybuilders, I got to be all in. And if I want to, play professional football, I got to be all in. And of course that actually led to professional wrestling. But even then, I'm going to be all in. I'm going to be a world champion. And when I surrender my life to the Lord, I'm like, I am not going to be, a pew warmer, bench warmer. I'm all in. And so, I went on mission trips. I helped build churches and Bible schools and chaperoned youth trips. And now you look back, and I've been to 30 different countries, all 50 states. I've preached in about 1,200 churches. I've written 3 books currently. Got a podcast, a radio show, getting ready this afternoon. I'll film 3 episodes for a new Man Up TV show. So I'm just trying to take all of my past experience, my love for the Lord, and just see how many people I can potentially impact for God's kingdom at this point. That's the motivation for me now. And as you said, to do everything I do with excellence. Yeah. So even if you're not a believer, you can. There are plenty that aren't that still have that desire to do things with excellence. And you're right. That's what we should do.
No doubt, no doubt. So there's a couple things. One, I messed up because we haven't talked Road Warriors at all yet. And then there's a couple finishing questions as we close out, but I don't know if I'll give you an opportunity to say anything you want about the Road Warriors.
Legion of Doom, Animal and Hawk. Um, Ivan and I had some classic matches against them, especially some of those Russian chain matches. Um, they were everything you imagine they might be, and when you look at their physiques and their physical bodies. And a little quick backstory on Animal. I recruited him out of New Brighton, Minnesota, Irondale High School to play college football with me. Played for a couple years. He ended up dropping out. I ended up finishing, graduating. And next thing I know, he got into professional wrestling. He's got this mohawk and paint and all kinds of, right? He ends up being the one who called me to tell me about the character for Ivan, the nephew for Ivan
Yeah.
Koloff, this nephew. So in a sense, he recruited me into wrestling. And then we would later, of course, become, when the superpowers teamed up, We had some classic matches, those war games with the Road Warriors and the Superpowers against the Four Horsemen, right? Lex and Tully Blanchard, who is also another sold out believer, by the way.
Oh, nice.
Just interviewed him for the podcast. That hasn't aired yet, but Arn Anderson, Double A, and you could have. I don't care what combination. If it was a single match, a tag team, a 6-man, an 8-man, a war games, you would not have a bad match against the Four Horsemen. They were consummate professionals, and so yeah, Legion of Doom. There's my quick insight on the Legion of Doom.
All right. All right. Anything else you want to throw out there for the guys? Just advice, tips, or something for Christian dads to take away?
I think it's just important. One of the things between our conferences, our 1-day conferences, which, our goal in that conference is, and obviously you can only give them so much information in a handful of hours, but we want to give them a really kind of a taste of what the full camp is like. And in that sense, our goal, whether it's the conference or the camp, our goal is to help teach, train, equip, empower, and then deploy men back to their homes, back to their communities to be godly men, godly husbands, and godly fathers. I strongly feel like manhood and masculinity have been under such attack over the last couple, 3, 4 decades. So this is not overnight. This is over decades that manhood has been attacked. And part of the moniker, it's time to man up, right? And so we want to see men living holy lives. I like to say whole men, WHOLE, whole healthy men living holy lives, wholly available unto the Lord, making themselves available unto the Lord, to serve their families well, to be a servant leader in their family, to serve their families well, impact their communities, and ultimately do everything they do unto the glory of God. And so that would be my challenge to men in kind of closing this out is set your gaze on that, make it a desire or be determined to accomplish that. And I believe you're going to hear at the end, when it's all said and done, well
Well
done,
done.
thy good and faithful servant.
Brings tears to my eyes every time I hear that.
Mm, amen.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then your website is nikitakoloff.com, I think.
Yeah, there's a shorter version, just koloff.net, just
Okay.
koloff.net. But either one will get them there, nikitakoloff.com or koloff.net. I call it kind of my one-stop shop. In other words, they can go on there and they can certainly learn a little bit more about my wrestling career, but they can also link to my podcast. They can link to and learn more about the man camp that Lex and I co-facilitate. They can connect with me on all of social media. Some of the books we talked about today, my life story, the one with Jeffrey Gittimer, is available there on the website. And so it's all really right there, koloff.net or nikitakoloff.com.
Perfect. We'll link those in the show notes. And you just mentioned a challenge. Can you bite size that down and put that into not the whole thing, but a part of it into something the guys can do this week between this episode and the next episode coming out? Is there some type of a actionable item where they can stop, write it down, and do something this week?
Yep, absolutely. You know what? Set a goal over the next 7 days to do one random act of kindness, and ideally for somebody you don't know. One random act of kindness, and while you're at it, maybe speak a positive, encouraging word to that individual. It can be a cashier at the grocery store. It can whatever, whoever. But just set a goal over the next 7 days, each day for the next 7 days, to do one random act of kindness, and maybe also speak a positive, encouraging word to that individual. There's a call to action.
That is a fantastic one. And guys, if you do that, You have no idea what your week might be like. It might be one of the most memorable weeks of your life.
Be salt and light. Go out and be salt and light, guys.
Absolutely. Well, Nikita, thank you so much for being so generous with your time and then just literally giving all of your life to the Lord. So this has been amazing, and thankful you and your father reunited and he spoke those words to you. Guys, tell your kids you love them all the time. You heard how beneficial and blessed that was for Nikita, redeeming that earthly relationship so that he was restored and had a greater love for the Father. Just amazing.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you for having me on, and God bless all of your listeners out there, your audience, and it's just an honor to be here. Thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely. My pleasure.